Tonight, New York is digging out, while huge parts of the United States are still trying to keep the lights on. Winter Storm Fern has already turned daily life into survival mode. Deadly cold, record snowfall in places, and hundreds of thousands of customers without power. And now, another coastal system is lining up offshore, threatening a second wave of blizzard conditions along the East Coast.
Inside two different disasters at once. There is the snap more trees and power lines, putting thousands of additional disaster straight into the next. Happening while a second storm, Jana, lines up offshore, threatening to also shut down blood drives. Since January, Winter Storm Gianna lines up to hit the Carolinas and Virginia, quietly over the Pacific Ocean. Around January 21st, a powerful low-pressure events have been canceled nationwide. That means over 20,000 units of blood but the crisis in the United States is not. At least 119 people where the indoor temperature has dropped close to the freezing mark.
Here's what we can confirm at this hour. Reports indicate at least dozens of deaths, with some official counts pushing into the triple digits as this situation develops. Power crews are facing widespread outages. More than 400,000 homes and businesses have been affected in the latest tallies. Air travel has been disrupted, highways have seen closures and severe delays. And in many communities, the biggest threat isn't just snow, it's how long the cold is lasting.
Gym floors are lined with cots and folded blankets. Children play quietly with the Gov website for the 2026 winter storm was updated again on January 30th. On the ground, that structure translated into a dangerous mix of heavy snow. The storm that Americans now know as Winter Storm Fern began floors as the temperature outside plunged. In one of the large humid air slammed into Arctic air diving south. It created a system formed over the open water. Then
you kidding me? Come on! Whoa! Unbelievable! Yeah, keep it up. See what happens. Oh, that's it. Hey.
Oh my God! Oh my...
1,000 miles, wrapping around a deep low-pressure center. It swept across the central United States, then into the deep south. From the Four Corners region, Fern spread out like a white, rotating shield.
So, how did Fern become this destructive? This storm was fueled by a dangerous combination. A surge of bitter Arctic air meeting moisture and energy from the Atlantic. When that collision happens in the right corridor, the atmosphere can rapidly organize into a powerful winter system. One that produces heavy snow, intense wind, and brutal wind chills at the same time. And that same time detail matters. Snow alone is disruptive. Cold alone is dangerous. But snow plus wind plus prolonged cold, especially when it knocks out power, creates cascading failures.
Winter storms North America has seen in years. Sources of moisture. One came up from the Gulf of Mexico, the other in from the Pacific. When that warm designed for this kind of weight. Between January 23rd and 26th, airlines canceled over 20,000. All of that would already be enough to mark Fern as a historic storm. But for millions, the temperature kept falling, and warnings about the next storm started to arrive. Millions of people, the real crisis began after the radar echoes faded, when the lights stayed off.
का तूफान ये मैं होटल से थोड़ा सा बाहर आया
At least 119 people had lost their lives in the United States. In some areas, the main killer was not the snow itself, but the cold that followed.
Major cities don't just experience storms, they absorb them through infrastructure. A dense population means more people depending on transit, more people needing heat, and more pressure on emergency response. Immediately, when roads lock up, deliveries slow. When deliveries slow, supplies thin out. And when the grid takes damage, trees, ice, wind, every hour without electricity becomes harder than the last.
While the radar no longer shows a giant snowstorm, on large parts of the central and eastern United States are still running far colder than normal. South and the east, pushing temperatures far below the late January average. Late on January 30th, officials estimated that close to 200,000 reports that around 1,400 volunteers and staff are working across 13 states. According to surface temperature analyses from NASA and NOAA, on Thursday night alone, roughly 2,800 people spent the night in a storm. The humanitarian map tells a different story. The American Red Cross room of Arctic air is still locked in over the Midwest. The emergency shelters are trying to stay warm on cots and gyms. At the same time, federal and state agencies are still treating this as an active winter disaster. Virginia and Texas still had no electricity. For many, pointing people to warming centers, shelters, and local hotlines. It warns that communities already hit hard of them. The blackout began days ago when Fern first brought down power lines. Fern must now
The outage story is where storms like Fern turn historic. Heat goes first, then refrigeration, then charging. Hospitals and critical facilities can run on backup, but neighborhoods can't live on backup for days. And in sub-freezing temperatures, a long blackout isn't just inconvenient, it can be life-threatening. That's why officials keep repeating the same message. If you have a safe warming location, use it. If you don't, reach out, because this is exactly when people get trapped.
Yet more power outages to the East Coast within hours, non-relatives in other states. Many of these families have been here since the weekend, after coastal flooding, and they are waiting for two things that still have not fully returned. Heat. Walk into one of the emergency shelters still open tonight, and the scale.
What's happening? Why are we stopped? Look at the cliff.
Platelets were never collected. For doctors in trauma centers and cancer wards, it is to find medical help if someone in the family depends on oxygen, dialysis. Emergency is building. The same winter storm that knocked out power and shut down highways is a statistic with very real faces behind it. They are being asked to prepare for more traffic accidents, more heart attacks, more cold. People arrive at the door shivering. Some, after spending hours in dark, unheated homes, have turned into unofficial warming stations, filling a gap when the 3rd, more than 500 blood donation of uncertainty. Red Cross workers describe the same pattern repeating across 13 states. Even more people into shelters and emergency rooms that are already operating at the volunteers hand out hot drinks, simple meals.
Even after snowfall stops, recovery doesn't begin instantly. Plows need space. Crews need access. Salt and treatment need timing. Airports and rail corridors don't flip back on like a switch, especially when wind keeps blowing snow back onto cleared routes. For millions, the next 24 hours are about basics: warmth, food, medication, and information.
Here's the important part. South Carolina, a state that rarely sees power crews still working 14-hour shifts to restring lines that snapped under the weight of a Highway NC-12 along the Outer Banks. Forecasts call for much of the state to pick up at least 10 centimeters of snow. With lost wages, spoiled food, children out of school for days, for the area, with parts of the barrier islands facing ice. And then there is the slower, less visible damage. Up to 30 centimeters of snow can be overwashed by the ocean. For towns that depend on that single road, a closure thermometer as closely as the radar. In Florida's citrus belt, the temperature drops again. Farther south, farmers are watching the behind. Across the country, the response to Fern and the approach of Guyana, prolonged hard freeze could damage or destroy parts of this year's orange and grapefruit crop, and now looks like a long relay race with no clear finish line. In the South and lower Midwest, utility companies are still repairing customers at risk of losing electricity just as growers are preparing for overnight lows near or below freezing. A prolonged
Now, here's the critical part, because Fern may not be the final chapter this week. Forecasters are watching a new nor'easter developing offshore. If it tracks close enough, it can bring fresh rounds of heavy snow, strong coastal winds, and near whiteout conditions, exactly when crews are still repairing the grid and clearing roads. In other words, the second storm doesn't need to be bigger to be worse. It just needs to hit before recovery is finished.
in Virginia. Bucket trucks are being pre-positioned along key highways. At the same time, energy companies from the Deep South to the Mid-Atlantic are warning emergency declarations keep the flow of federal resources open and allow governors to move. The American Red Cross, Salvation Army, and local partners are keeping shelters open in burnout, and logistics teams are trying to keep up with the demand for heavy snow and wind. Emergency management agencies are working on a similar double track. National relief organizations are extending their timelines as well, the damage from last week's storm, while at the same time staging extra crews closer to the Carolinas, trying to get ahead of the storm instead of reacting to it. Major airlines have issued state and county offices that spent the last 10 days coordinating shelter openings, rebooking policies for passengers flying into or out of affected East Coast last-minute chaos at crowded terminals. Cruise lines so that people who may lose power again know exactly where to go. In case Guyana forces more evacuations, volunteers are being rotated to prevent equipment and personnel more quickly. Local governments are using schedules and routes to avoid the worst of the high winds and rough seas. Regional 13 states, while also identifying potential new locations along the East Coast, text alerts, social media, and traditional media to push out on hot meals and medical transport. In the travel and energy sectors, companies are...
Fern is being described as historic in impact, and not only because of snow totals. It's the combination, extreme cold, widespread outages, and how long the disruption lasts. And many experts warn that storms like this are testing the limits of infrastructure designed for a calmer climate era, especially when extreme events cluster close together.
Even similar weak points. A single highway like NC-12 on the outer band into choke points when more than 20,000 flights were canceled in just 4 days. For updates, Fern and Guyana together look less like isolated events and more like a stress. Businesses that depend on just-in-time deliveries, even a few days of disruption can risk state corridor choked by snow and ice, can cut off entire communities from combined to turn heavy, wet snow into days without heat for hundreds. Power grids designed decades ago, especially in the South, struggled under the weight of fuel, food, and medical care. Watch airports that serve as national hubs turn test for how the United States handles extreme winter ripple through supply chains for weeks. There is also a deeper climate signal that weather. One of the clearest lessons is about infrastructure and limited underground cabling, all hundreds of thousands of people. Transportation systems showed ice storms and larger swings between unseasonable warmth into the same pattern along the East Coast. Perhaps the most sobering lesson is how the question now is not only how to rebuild after this winter, but how to make sure the next Fern storm systems do line up. The result can be heavy or Guyana does not push the same systems even closer to the breaking point. Tonight, a week, power crews, hospital staff, and volunteers are already stretched thin. How quickly essential systems can be pushed toward their limits. The national blood supply fell sharply in a matter of days. Shelter networks filled up in less than and dangerous Arctic outbreaks. Fern poured that added moisture into one of the scientists have been warning about for years. A warmer atmosphere can hold more largest winter storm footprints in recent memory. Guyana is now preparing to tap in Florida's citrus groves to the barrier islands of North Carolina. This has been a season that before the next storm even makes landfall. The freezing wind, hospital staff stretching dwindling blood supplies to keep critical pen in cold houses, by long lines at shelters, and by the quiet fear of one patient alive. In every image of damage, there is also a story of people trying. For millions of people, this winter will be remembered not by storm names, but by nights something else. Neighbors running extension cords to each other's homes. Volunteers.
If you lived through Fern, whether in New York or anywhere in the storm's path, your story matters. What failed first where you live? Power, roads, heating, communication? And what do you think needs to change before the next winter storm hits? Share your city and your experience in the comments so others can compare what they're seeing in real time. If these updates help you, please like the video, share it with anyone in the storm's path, and subscribe so you don't miss our next breaking report as this situation continues to evolve.
And as always, stay safe, stay informed, and stay prepared.